Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point. And today we are here to talk about the death of George Floyd. And so unless you've been under a rock, you pretty much know what happened. I try not to do videos or respond to stuff, in the heat of passion when it's first going down. I like to get some backstory on, what was going on, what happened. And so there's more information that's coming out, and I want to share that with you guys. But before I do that, I want to read a post that I made on Facebook earlier today that kind of, sum up my feelings of whenever we have these police involved killings. This wasn't a shooting. He died by, them putting pressure on his neck and some other stuff that was going on. But anyway, just overall, how we respond when these things happen, and just basically taking a deeper look into, going beneath the surface of, being emotional and outraged when, people die while in police custody or when being apprehended, and looking at it a little deeper. And so it was a short post, but I basically said #reality check. As angry and upset as we are about #George Floyd, #Breonna Taylor, and the long list of hashtags that came before them, we have to have a reality check. Whether you support the protests, riots, looting, and destruction of property or not support it, there is one reality that remains. Nothing we do can stop a random cop from having a random encounter with a random unarmed black person that, for whatever reason, be it racism, poor training, or out of control emotions, that leads to an unjustified death. Just like we can't stop a random car from running a red light and careening into a random car that had a green light and killing a random family that was rightfully proceeding through the intersection. It's a harsh reality, but we have to come to terms with it. It's okay to be outraged and want to lash out, but when it's all said and done, what is the game plan? Is it to lobby for laws and punishments designed specifically to address cops that kill unarmed people? Is it for laws and punishment to address excessive force by police? Is it to create a nationwide database to prevent these cops from getting other law enforcement or first responder jobs when they are fired from their current department that they're working for? Or will it be 2 weeks from now and the anger has subsided and life goes on until the next horrific incident to surface and the next hashtag to pop up to do it all over again? #reality check 2. No one is coming to save us. We have to save ourselves and learn how to lobby for laws that protect us. Vote people into office that will stand boldly for us. Support people who can at least have a voice in the rooms that matter. And so that's kind of like what I'm feeling about, what are the next steps? Why do we keep ending up back where we are right now? Someone is killed. We have marches and protests. And then 2 weeks later, it's kind of forgotten about until the next time it rolls around. And right now we're in a situation where we have a presidential election coming up, believe it or not, in November. And I see more stuff about, what Trump is saying and very little about what Biden is saying. And I kind of feel like Biden is being forced down our throats. And so I talk a little bit on my Facebook page about the fact that, we have a generation of people who are saying they don't care about Trump being elected. Stop telling them, go vote Democrat, but you're not putting anybody in, you're not giving us a candidate that's worth supporting. And so now we have a group of people that are saying, we would rather sit out the election and show them, show the Democratic Party how strong our vote really is and demand the things that we want if they want our vote again, than, sitting there trying to fight to keep Trump out of office. And so a lot of people don't really understand that type of thinking, and they're thinking, well, we got to get Trump out of office. We got to get Trump out of office. But what they're not realizing is that people are saying we're tired of the black vote being taken for granted, so we're going to withhold our vote to get their attention. So I don't know how that strategy is going to work out. I don't know how it's going to come into play now that we have another black person, unarmed black person, that's been killed by police. Then we have all the stuff that's coming up today that's talking about, there's been a lot of violent protests that have been going on, destruction of property, just a whole lot of chaos. And so while black people are saying we have a right to be angry, we have a right to riot, and to do what we're doing to get the attention of the powers that be, but we all know from past experience that doesn't get their attention. But that is what black people are coming out saying today. But now we have news reports coming out, where in Minnesota they're saying that they're using contact tracing. And for those who don't know what contact tracing is, that term gained popularity recently because of the coronavirus. And they are saying that, we're interviewing people, we're calling people, we're trying to trace the people that those who tested positive have come in contact with. And they're calling that contact tracing. But in its purest form, contact tracing is actually using location information that comes from your smartphone devices. And when you're downloading apps onto your phone and not reading the terms and conditions, you're basically giving people permission to access your phone's data and do whatever they really want to do with it. And the police are basically, I can't think of the amendment, the constitutional amendment. It may be Amendment 10. Don't quote me on that. But the police and law enforcement is basically bypassing your rights as a citizen, and they're using your information that's being gathered on these smartphones and all these apps and using it for their own benefit. And so what is happening now in Minnesota is that they're using contact tracing, where they're getting data from the cell towers to figure out who was in the area during these riots. And then they take that information. In some cases, they can actually access your phone, access your images, access your video. And you notice whenever you approve an app, they say to you, by approving this, we can access your pictures, we can access your video. And so they are basically taking that information, and then they get all of these lives that take place during the protests. And so they're just comparing that information, and they're figuring out who these people are. They're starting to make arrests once they figure out who these people are. But then it came out today that they expect, or they project, that 80% of the people that were in Minnesota participating in these protests weren't even from Minnesota. They've identified many of the people as being white supremacists. They've identified people as being members of drug cartels and even foreign. I think they said foreign actors. Now, I don't know if that meant that they were acting as in performing, or if that's a name that they give foreigners, but they said foreign actors. And so in that sense that they're putting this narrative out, is now, you've taken our power away when dealing with the police, and now you're taking our power away from protesting and making a statement by now saying, it wasn't the black people that were out there protesting that was causing the violence, that was, fighting back. It was actually these people, these agitators, that were leading this movement of looting stores and setting stuff on fire. And so, it's just like we have no voice. We are just a voiceless people, no matter which way we go and no matter what we try to do. And so I can go on and on that rant, but I'm really here just to give you guys just some updated information of what they're saying happened, what the timeline was all about that took place. Police were trying to put George Floyd, who lost his life, into a police car, and then things got chaotic. He was telling them that he was, well, actually, let's back up to what started the whole situation. He went into a store and he bought some cigarettes, and he paid for the cigarettes with what the store clerk identified as a counterfeit $20 bill. She called the owner of the store, asked him what should she do. The owner said, call the police. And so they had went outside, I guess, to stop him and let him know, hey, this is a counterfeit bill. But he, refused to give back the cigarettes. They asked him to give back the cigarettes. He wouldn't do it. And so then they ended up calling the police. And so the police arrived, and it wasn't even the police officer that had his knee on his neck that was the original responding officer. He actually showed up later. And so they went to the car, and it was two police officers, one named J.K. Kong, K-U-E-N-G, and then the other one name was Thomas Lane. And so they, well, hold on a second. Let me get to the actual document. I'm going to read you guys the charging document, because we know the guy that had his knee on his neck was actually arrested. And so this was the statement of probable cause. It says on May 25th, 2020, someone called 911 and reported that a man bought merchandise from Cup Foods at 3759 Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, Hennepin County, Minnesota, with a counterfeit $20 bill. At 8:08 p.m., Minneapolis Police Department officers Thomas Lane and J.A. Kong arrived with their body-worn cameras activated and running. The officers learned from store personnel that the man who passed the counterfeit $20 bill was parked in a car around the corner from the store on 38th Street. The body-worn camera video obtained by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension shows that the officers approached the car, Lane on the driver's side and Kong on the passenger side. 3 people were in the car. George Floyd was in the driver's seat, a known adult male was in the passenger seat, and a known adult female was sitting in the back seat. And see, I haven't seen any reports saying that there were other people in the car with him when all of this happened. And then it says, as Officer Lane began speaking with Mr. Floyd, he pulled his gun out and pointed it at Mr. Floyd's open window and directed Mr. Floyd to show his hands. When Mr. Floyd put his hands on the steering wheel, Lane put his gun back in its holster. While Officer Kong was speaking with the front seat passenger, Officer Lane ordered Mr. Floyd out of the car, put his hands on Mr. Floyd, and pulled him out of the car. Officer Lane handcuffed Mr. Floyd. Mr. Floyd actively resisted being handcuffed. Once handcuffed, Mr. Floyd became compliant and walked with Officer Lane to the sidewalk and sat on the ground at Officer Lane's direction. So if you guys have seen the video that was taken from the store, I believe it was the owners of the store, we don't really see it. The video starts at him being out of the car and being walked around the vehicle and then coming over to the sidewalk and them putting him sitting down on the sidewalk. And the owner of the store was actually on CNN, and he stated that there is more video, but the police have asked him not to release that video. And when asked if the video shows George Floyd resisting arrest, the owner of the store says that none of the video that he watched actually shows him resisting arrest. And so then it goes on to say, in a conversation that lasted just under 2 minutes, Officer Lang asked Mr. Floyd for his name and identification. Officer Lane asked Mr. Floyd if he was, quote, on anything, end quote, and explained that he was arresting Mr. Lloyd for passing counterfeit currency. Officers Kong and Lane stood Mr. Floyd up and attempted to walk Mr. Floyd to their squad car, and that was squad car number 320, at 8:14 p.m. Mr. Floyd stiffened up, fell to the ground, and told the officers he was claustrophobic. Then they say that police officers Derek Chauvin, and he's the one that's been arrested, he's the one that had the knee on Floyd's neck, and Tao Tho then arrived in a separate squad car. The officers made several attempts to get Mr. Floyd in the back seat of squad car 320 from the driver's side. Mr. Floyd did not voluntarily get in the car and struggled with the officers by intentionally falling down, saying he was not going in the car and refusing to stand still. Mr. Floyd is over 6 feet tall and weighs more than 200 pounds. Now, they are assuming that he was falling down and trying to resist getting in the car because he didn't want to be arrested, but he's already said that he was claustrophobic. And I'm thinking, if you are claustrophobic and someone is trying to put you into a small environment, such as the back of a police car. Now, keep in mind, the back of a police car is not the same as the back of our cars. There's usually a glass plate behind the front seats of the car, the space. I've seen a lot of people, like on television, on cops and stuff, when they're placing people in the back seat of a police car, the people have to turn sideways, because the space is so small and confined. And then keep in mind, they're saying that he weighed over 200 pounds and he was a tall man. And so I can imagine that if you're claustrophobic, that would be a horrible position to be in, being forced in the back of these small spaces in police cars. And so it says, the defendant went to the passenger side. Well, when they're saying defendant, if I slip and say defendant, I'm talking about Derek Chauvin, who is the former police officer that's been charged with his murder. It says, It says, Chauvin went to the passenger side and tried to get Mr. Floyd into the car from that side, and Lane and Kong assisted. And so it says the defendant pulled Mr. Lloyd, which is the Derek Chauvin, pulled Mr. Lloyd out of the passenger side of the squad car at 8:19 and 38 seconds p.m. And Mr. Floyd went to the ground face down and still handcuffed. Kong held Mr. Floyd's back and Lane held his legs. The defendant placed the left knee in the area of Mr. Floyd's head and neck. Mr. Floyd said, quote, "I can't breathe," end quote, multiple times, and repeatedly said mama and please as well. And for those of you who don't know, his mom actually passed away about 2 years ago. And so just imagine just how stressed out and panicked he was that he was calling for his mother, who's already deceased. And so it says the defendant and once again, Derek Chauvin and the other two officers stayed in their positions. The officer said, quote, "You are talking fine," end quote, to Mr. Floyd as he continued to move back and forth. Lane asked, quote, "Should we roll him on his side," end quote, and Chauvin said, quote, "No, staying put where we got him," end quote. Officer Lane said, quote, "I am worried about excited delirium or whatever they call it," end quote. Chauvin replied, "That's why we have him on his stomach," end quote. None of the three officers moved from their positions. And so the body-worn camera video shows Mr. Floyd continued to move and breathe. At 8:24 and 24 seconds, Mr. Floyd stopped moving. At 8 minutes 25 at 8 at 8 p.m. 8 oh my god. At 8:25 and 31 seconds p.m., the video appears to show Mr. Floyd ceasing to breathe or speak. Lane said, quote, "Want to roll him on his side," end quote. Kong checked Mr. Floyd's right wrist for a pulse and said, quote, "I couldn't find one," end quote. None of the officers moved from their positions. At 8:27 and 24 seconds p.m., the defendant removed his knee, and the defendant, once again being Derek Chauvin, removed his knee from Mr. Floyd's neck. An ambulance and emergency medical personnel arrived. The officers placed Mr. Floyd on a gurney and the ambulance left the scene. Mr. Floyd was pronounced dead at Hennepin County Medical Center, and I believe he was pronounced dead at like 9:25 p.m. And several people have asked, why did it take an hour for him to be pronounced dead if he had stopped breathing and moving at the scene? And I know in other cases that I read about, they don't declare people deceased at the scene, because then they have to bring the medical examiners and all of that. And so what they'll do is, even though they know the person is probably already gone, they will transport them to the hospital and then make the determination at the hospital. But it seems like a whole hour had passed between them getting him from the site. Maybe they tried to administer CPR and other life-saving techniques at the scene before transporting him to the hospital. Or maybe he was still alive. He may have lost brain activity, but the heart could have still been pumping, and so technically he wasn't dead yet. And so then it goes on to say the Hennepin County medical examiner conducted Mr. Floyd's autopsy on May 26, 2020. The full report of the ME is pending, but the ME has made the following preliminary findings. The autopsy revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Mr. Floyd had underlying health conditions, including coronary artery disease and hypertensive heart disease. The combined effects of Mr. Floyd being restrained by the police, his underlying health conditions, and any potential intoxicants in his system likely contributed to his death. And then you guys know that toxicology tests typically take, I think, 10 or more days to come back. And so a lot of people were saying, why are they saying potential intoxicants if they don't have the actual conclusive results? And the reason they're saying that is because the people from the store had said that he appeared to be intoxicated or under some type of influence, and then the police officers observed the same thing when they took him from the car. And then we don't know what the two friends that were in the car with him said to police as to whether or not he had been drinking or whatever. And then it says the defendant, which is Derek Chauvin, had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in total. 2 minutes and 53 seconds of this was after Mr. Floyd was non-responsive. Police are trained that this type of restraint with a subject in a prone position is inherently dangerous. Then it says that Derek Chauvin is currently in custody. And his bail was $500,000, and I'm not sure if he has bailed out of jail, but we know they typically do bail out of jail quite quickly. And there were reports that he had actually fled Minnesota and was in Windermere, Florida, which is right outside of Orlando. And there were people, they had released an address on social media. People had gone to that address protesting. But according to the media, he was arrested in Minnesota and that there was no indication that he had ever left the state. But we don't know. They could have flown him out of the area and then flown him back. People were saying that he was removed from his home in Minnesota by the National Guard and taken to a safe place. And that safe place could very well have been in Windermere, Florida. And then there was an article I read where his brother said that he was called by Donald Trump, but Trump didn't let him speak. And so the brother name is Floyd, speaking out after the death of his brother George Floyd, the black man whose fatal encounter with police was caught on camera with viral footage, sparking widespread outrage on social media. As protests erupt across the country, Floyd virtually spoke with MSNBC's Al Sharpton on Saturday and talked about the conversations he had with President Donald Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden, who is the presumptive Democratic nominee in the 2020 presidential election. He says, quote, "I never had to beg a man before, but I asked Biden, could he please get justice for my brother, please, because I need it. I just don't want to see him on a shirt like those other guys. Nobody deserves that," end quote. And then it says, meanwhile, Floyd said his call with Trump was much different. Quote, "It was so fast, he didn't give me the opportunity to even speak. It was hard. I was trying to talk to him, but he just kept pushing me off quote, I don't want to hear what you're talking about," end quote. I just told him I want justice. I said that I can't believe that they committed a modern day lynching in broad daylight. I can't stand for that. That hurt me. I just don't understand, man, he said as he became emotional and fought back tears. Quote, "Why we have to go through this? Why we got to have all this pain, man? I love my brother. I'm never going to see him again." And so a spokesman from the White House did not immediately respond to a request for comment or to confirm that the conversation had taken place. Then they talk about Trump being in Florida for the space launch that took place today. And he stated, "Yesterday, I spoke to George's family and expressed the sorrow of our entire nation for their loss. I stand before you as a friend and ally to every American seeking justice and peace, and I stand before you in firm opposition to anyone exploiting this tragedy to loot, rob, and menace. Healing, not hatred, justice, not chaos, are the mission at hand." And then it goes on to say, "I understand the pain that people are feeling. We support the right of peaceful protest and we hear the pleas, but we are now seeing on the streets of our cities has nothing to do with the memory of George Floyd. The violence and vandalism is being led," and then he goes on because he's been on Twitter all day talking about Antifa and other radical left-wing groups are the ones that's causing all the lawlessness at the protests. And then he's saying that, trying to counter the argument I talked about earlier about the Minnesota police saying that it is white supremacists that's causing all the problems, undercover white supremacists causing the problems. And then yesterday, Trump made a tweet, something about when the looting starts, the shooting starts, kind of basically telling Minnesota he was sending in the National Guard and giving them the authority to shoot people if they're out there breaking the law. And we know that breaking into businesses, looting, does not warrant the death penalty. So he was way out of line for that. And so just rude and disrespectful, calling the family and then not letting them speak or letting them have the opportunity to fully express what they are feeling. And then there's stories out that George Floyd and the former police officer Derek Chauvin actually worked at the same nightclub together. And so there was an article that talked about that, and they spoke to the lady who used to own the nightclub where they were doing security work at, and she said that she sold the nightclub back in January, I believe, but she didn't believe that they actually knew each other. She said that George Floyd worked there during the week, I believe, and that the police officer who had worked there for 17 years. Now, I don't know if the article got it confused that the officer worked at this nightclub for 17 years or if the officer had been a police officer for 17 years, because I think 17 years for a nightclub, that's pretty remarkable. Most of them don't last that long. But she said that George Floyd worked during the weekdays and that I think on Latin nights, which took place during the middle of the week, and that Chauvin worked on the weekends when they had what they called their urban nights. And she talked about having to repeatedly talk to him about how aggressive he was and the fact that he had a zero tolerance policy with patrons of the club, and that, you did anything, he would toss them from the club. And so she probably could have kept that to herself, because it kind of makes her look like she might be a little racist and a little biased, because why would you have somebody on your payroll that's constantly mistreating your patrons, the people that are helping keep your doors open? And so I thought that was a little crazy on her part for even bringing that up. And then also there was another article that talked about, speaking of his aggressive nature, he had actually been reprimanded throughout his career numerous times. And so he had, it wasn't like this was something random. He has a bad record for, the use of force and the way that he treats he's treated other suspects or people that he has encountered as a police officer. And so that may play a part in what his frame of mind is when he was working and dealing with George Floyd. Maybe he just has a low tolerance level for Black people, like so many of them do. And I believe there was another story that came out that he had actually shot a suspect. But I'll have to go back and research that. It was something that I saw in passing. And then his charges for what he's been arrested for is third-degree murder, which is only a charge that's in like 3 states. I know here in Florida, they have third-degree murder, and then Minnesota, and there was one other place that they say have a third-degree murder charge. And then he's also being charged with manslaughter, and they are looking into charges for the other 3 police officers that were there. And I just found it interesting, as I read through that report, that the Lane guy the Thomas Lane guy seems to have been the only one cognizant of what was going on and wanted to render aid to George Floyd. So I don't know if that is going to play a part in what charges come down pertaining to him. And then I also want to add in this that the person who video recorded the entire incident, that was floating around on social media, is a 17-year-old girl, and people were really coming at her, saying, why was she standing there recording? Why didn't she do more? Now, keep in mind that this was 4 police officers against this one man, and to be harassing this teenage girl and saying that she should have jumped in and did more, I think is ridiculous. And although he has deleted his posts, or either I can't find the post, Jamal Bryant was one of those people that had the audacity to make a post saying that he would never stand by and record. He would step in and try to help the person. And, people were really coming at him saying, sure you would, because if she had approached those police officers, she'd probably be dead also. And so I just think that that's really reckless rhetoric. And when you consider this is a 17-year-old girl that they're directing this to, it just really makes no sense. So just wanted to provide this information for those of you that may have been looking for answers of what's going on. Go ahead, leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And we can talk about it in the comments. Until the next time, guys, I shall talk to you later. Everybody stay safe and try to, just stay calm, relax. If the images that you're seeing, the video that you're seeing, the stories that you're seeing are becoming overwhelming and too much, it's okay to go ahead and turn off the television. And to be honest with you, it feels like the protests have been hijacked anyway, because we had 3 protests here in Florida today alone, and all of them were 80 to 90% non-black people at the protest. So it's like they've taken over anyway. So try to just, just relate, relax, and release. And until the next time, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.